What if the reason walking leaves you tired isn't age at all, but the kind of movement you've been told to rely on? After 65, the body doesn't quietly surrender its strength, it waits for clearer instructions. Fatigue is not always a warning, sometimes it is feedback. A signal that the muscles, the brain, and the balance system are no longer being spoken to in the language they understand. This is not about pushing harder or lasting longer. It is about discovering why 5 intentional minutes can awaken systems that 30 familiar minutes never reach, and how the human body, even now, remains remarkably ready to respond when movement finally meets biology. Most people are told that after 65, slowing down is natural, unavoidable, almost required. This idea settles quietly into the mind and reshapes how the body is treated, as if age itself were a signal to withdraw effort. Yet biology tells a very different story. The human body does not age in a straight line of decline, it adapts according to how it is used. What we often call getting old is frequently the result of repetitive patterns that no longer challenge the systems responsible for strength, coordination, and resilience. Walking, while valuable, often becomes one of those patterns that no longer speaks clearly enough to the deeper mechanisms of the body. Walking is familiar and safe, which is why it is recommended so often. But familiarity has a hidden cost. When movement becomes predictable, the nervous system stops paying close attention. Muscles perform the same shallow contractions again and again, rarely reaching the threshold that signals them to grow stronger. Over time, the body becomes efficient at walking slowly, but less capable at responding to sudden demands, like regaining balance, stepping sideways, or rising from the floor. Fatigue sets in not because the body is weak, but because it is understimulated in the ways that matter most for aging well. At the cellular level, muscles are constantly listening for instructions. They respond not to duration, but to challenge. A short burst of purposeful movement tells muscle fibers that they are still needed, that they still have a role to play in protecting joints and supporting posture. Without that message, the body begins to recycle muscle tissue, especially the fast-responding fibers that help prevent falls. Walking rarely engages these fibers. A focused 5-minute routine, however, can awaken them gently, reminding the body that quick reactions and stability are still part of everyday survival. The brain, too, plays a central role in this conversation. Movement is not just mechanical, it is neurological. Every controlled motion requires the brain to calculate position, force, and timing. When movement becomes repetitive, those calculations become minimal. But when exercises involve balance, direction changes, or coordinated actions, the brain becomes actively involved again. Neural pathways strengthen through use, even later in life. This is why short, varied movements can improve confidence and coordination far more effectively than longer periods of simple walking. There is also an emotional layer that often goes unnoticed. Many older adults feel discouraged when walking leaves them tired or sore. They assume this fatigue is proof of decline. In reality, it is often a sign that the activity no longer matches the body's needs. When movement feels unrewarding, motivation fades. A 5-minute routine changes that dynamic. It feels achievable. It creates a sense of completion rather than exhaustion. This matters because the body responds better to consistency than to occasional effort, and consistency is driven by how movement makes us feel, not by how long it lasts. From a medical perspective, doctors increasingly recognize that health after 65 depends less on endurance and more on functional strength. Being able to stand up easily, maintain balance, And move with control has a greater impact on independence than the number of steps taken in a day. Short routines designed around these principles reduce joint strain while improving stability. They respect the realities of aging joints while still encouraging adaptation. This is why many physicians now recommend brief, targeted workouts over prolonged walking for those who feel tired or limited. Perhaps most importantly, this approach reframes aging itself. It replaces the idea of preservation with participation. Instead of trying to maintain what is left, the body is invited to continue evolving. 5 minutes becomes a daily reminder that the body is not finished, not fragile, not beyond improvement. It is simply waiting for movement that speaks its language, movement that is intentional, respectful, and precise, movement that aligns with how biology actually works rather than how tradition tells us it should, movement that feels less like obligation and more like a quiet dialogue between effort and renewal. As the body moves beyond 65, the changes that occur are often misunderstood as losses caused purely by time. In reality, many of these changes are responses to reduced demand. The body is efficient, almost economical, and it gradually lets go of what it is no longer asked to use. Strength fades not because the body is incapable of maintaining it, but because the signals that once sustained it grow weaker. This is where the difference between habitual walking and short, intentional movement becomes profoundly important. Muscles are living tissues that thrive on communication. Each contraction sends information to the brain, the bones, and even the immune system. When muscles work against resistance, they release signals that support metabolism, protect joints, and preserve bone density. Walking, especially at a comfortable pace, often fails to create enough of this internal dialogue. The muscles involved perform minimal work, and many critical stabilizing muscles remain quiet. Over time, the body interprets this silence as permission to reduce muscle mass, particularly in the legs and core, where strength is essential for balance and independence. What makes a 5-minute workout different is not its length, but its intent. When movements are designed to challenge posture, balance, and controlled force, the body immediately recognizes their importance. Even a small amount of resistance, such as bodyweight movements, can activate deep muscle fibers that walking rarely touches. These fibers are responsible for maintaining joint alignment and preventing sudden collapses in posture. When they are engaged regularly, the body regains a sense of internal support that walking alone cannot provide. The skeletal system responds in a similarly intelligent way. Bones are not static structures, they constantly remodel themselves in response to stress. Gentle pressure signals bones to maintain their density. Without it, bones gradually weaken. Walking provides some impact, but it is often too uniform to stimulate meaningful adaptation. Short, varied movements that involve shifting weight, rising from seated positions, or controlled lowering motions apply stress in multiple directions. This diversity of movement gives bones a reason to stay strong, even later in life. There is also a metabolic advantage to these brief routines. Muscles play a crucial role in regulating blood sugar and fat storage. When muscle mass declines, metabolic efficiency declines with it. A few minutes of strength-focused movement can improve insulin sensitivity more effectively than longer periods of low-intensity walking. This means the body becomes better at using energy rather than storing it, reducing the risk of metabolic disorders that often appear with age. The body does not require long sessions to benefit from this effect, it requires clear signals delivered consistently. Fatigue, which so many older adults experience during walking, often arises from inefficiency rather than weakness. When muscles lack strength, they work harder to perform simple tasks. The heart compensates, breathing increases, and exhaustion follows. Strengthening muscles through short, targeted movements reduces this inefficiency. Daily activities begin to require less effort. Walking itself becomes easier, not because more walking was done, but because the body was trained to support it properly. Doctors increasingly observe that patients who incorporate brief strength and balance exercises report less pain and greater confidence. This is not coincidence. Strong muscles absorb shock, protect joints, and reduce the strain placed on connective tissues. When movement feels stable and controlled, the nervous system relaxes. Pain decreases because the body is no longer operating in a state of constant compensation. 5 minutes of thoughtful movement can restore a sense of physical trust that long, repetitive activity often fails to provide. This approach respects the body's intelligence. It acknowledges that aging is not a process of shutting down, but of reallocating resources. When the body receives clear instructions, it responds with adaptation rather than decline. Short workouts do not exhaust the system, they educate it. They remind muscles, bones, and nerves that their roles are still essential. And when the body is reminded of its purpose, it responds not with resistance, but with quiet, steady improvement. Beneath every movement, no matter how small, there is a continuous exchange between the body and the brain, a quiet dialogue that becomes more important with age rather than less. Movement is not merely the result of muscles contracting, it is the outcome of the brain predicting, adjusting, and responding in real time. As people grow older, this system does not stop working, but it does become more dependent on stimulation. When daily movement becomes repetitive and predictable, the brain shifts into a low-attention mode. Walking, especially when done at the same pace on familiar paths, often requires little conscious involvement. The body moves, but the brain observes from a distance, conserving energy by relying on habit. This reliance on habit has consequences that are subtle at first. Balance is not a single function but a collaboration between vision, inner ear signals, joint awareness, and muscle response. When the brain is not regularly asked to integrate these inputs in new ways, the speed and accuracy of communication gradually decline. Reaction times lengthen. Small stumbles become more common, not because the muscles are incapable, but because the brain is slower to recognize and correct errors. A short, intentional workout interrupts this pattern by demanding attention. Each controlled movement invites the brain back into the process, reminding it that adaptation is still required. Neuroscience shows that the brain remains capable of forming new connections throughout life. This ability does not disappear after 65, it simply becomes more selective. The brain strengthens pathways that are used and trims those that are ignored. When movements involve balance, coordination, or changes in direction, they activate regions of the brain responsible for spatial awareness and motor planning. Even brief exposure to these challenges can improve the efficiency of neural pathways. The result is not just better movement during exercise, but improved control during everyday activities such as turning, reaching, or stepping over obstacles. There is also a psychological shift that occurs when the brain feels engaged rather than cautious. Many older adults move with a quiet fear of falling, often without realizing it. This fear alters posture and gait, creating stiffness that actually increases risk. When movements are practiced in a controlled environment with deliberate focus, the brain learns that instability can be managed. Confidence replaces caution. The nervous system relaxes, allowing muscles to respond more fluidly. This sense of control carries over into daily life, reducing tension and improving overall movement quality. Cognitive health is closely tied to this process. Movement that requires attention stimulates blood flow to the brain and encourages the release of substances that support neural health. Simple walking improves circulation, but it often lacks the mental engagement needed to fully activate these benefits. Short routines that require remembering sequences or adjusting movements based on feedback provide a richer stimulus. The brain responds to this complexity with increased alertness and clarity. Many people report feeling mentally sharper after brief, focused exercise than after longer periods of passive movement. Doctors who study aging emphasize the importance of integrating mind and body rather than treating them as separate systems. Real life rarely involves isolated physical tasks. It requires multitasking, awareness, and adaptation. Short workouts that involve coordination mirror these demands more closely than long walks. They train the brain to manage movement under changing conditions, which is essential for maintaining independence. This is why even a few minutes of intentional movement can have a disproportionate impact on daily functioning. Fatigue takes on a different meaning when the brain is actively involved. Monotonous movement can feel draining because the mind disengages, leaving the body to carry the effort alone. Engaged movement, by contrast, feels purposeful. The brain distributes effort more efficiently, and the body responds with energy rather than heaviness. 5 minutes of focused exercise often leaves people feeling more awake, not more tired, because the nervous system has been stimulated rather than dulled over time. This consistent engagement reshapes the relationship between the brain and the body. Movements become smoother, reactions faster, and posture more confident. The body no longer moves as if it is trying to avoid mistakes, but as if it trusts its ability to correct them. Aging does not silence the brain's capacity to learn and adapt, it simply requires movement that invites participation. When the brain is treated as an active partner in exercise, even brief routines become powerful tools for preserving balance, clarity, and confidence. There is a quiet emotional story that unfolds alongside physical aging, one that often goes unspoken. Many people over 65 do not stop moving because their bodies fail them, but because repeated experiences of fatigue, discomfort, or disappointment slowly reshape their expectations. When walking feels heavy, when energy runs out sooner than it used to, the mind begins to interpret these signals as evidence of decline. This interpretation matters because the brain is not a neutral observer. It assigns meaning to sensations, and those meanings influence how the body responds in the future. When movement consistently ends in exhaustion, the nervous system learns to associate activity with cost rather than reward. Motivation fades, not because of laziness, but because the brain is protecting the body from what it perceives as unnecessary strain. Walking, especially when done out of obligation rather than enjoyment, can reinforce this cycle. It becomes something to endure instead of something that restores. Over time, this emotional fatigue can be more limiting than physical weakness itself. A short, intentional workout changes this emotional equation in subtle but powerful ways. 5 minutes feels manageable. It does not demand endurance or long-term effort. The brain perceives it as safe, achievable, and finite. This perception lowers resistance before movement even begins. When the body completes a brief routine successfully, the brain registers completion rather than depletion. This sense of accomplishment releases small but meaningful signals of reward, reinforcing the desire to repeat the experience. Consistency grows from this emotional shift. The body adapts not just to physical stress, but to patterns of belief. When someone begins to trust that movement will leave them feeling better rather than worse, participation becomes easier. The fear of overexertion fades. Confidence builds quietly. Each small success accumulates, reshaping how the individual sees their own capacity. This internal narrative is critical because belief often determines behavior long before strength or endurance do. Doctors recognize that emotional well-being and physical health are deeply intertwined, especially later in life. Anxiety around movement can increase muscle tension, disrupt breathing, and elevate stress hormones. These responses make activity feel harder than it needs to be. Short, controlled movements performed in a calm environment reduce this stress response. The nervous system shifts from alertness to cooperation. Muscles move with less resistance. Breathing becomes more natural. The body feels supported rather than pressured. There is also dignity in this approach. Long walks can sometimes feel like a test of endurance, a comparison to past ability. Short routines focused on function emphasize presence rather than performance. They are about meeting the body where it is, not where it used to be. This fosters compassion rather than judgment. When movement is framed as care instead of correction, adherence improves. People are more likely to show up for themselves when they feel respected rather than measured. Social and psychological research shows that perceived control plays a major role in health outcomes. Feeling capable of influencing one's own body reduces stress and improves resilience. A 5-minute routine offers this sense of control. It fits easily into daily life. It does not require special equipment or long preparation. The individual decides when and how to move. This autonomy strengthens self-efficacy, which in turn supports long-term engagement with healthy behaviors. Pain perception is also influenced by emotional context. When movement is approached with fear or frustration, discomfort intensifies. When it is approached with curiosity and patience, the nervous system interprets sensations differently. Short routines allow space for awareness without overwhelm. They encourage listening rather than pushing. Over time, this mindful engagement can reduce chronic aches by teaching the brain that movement is not a threat. Perhaps most importantly, this approach restores a sense of relationship with the body. Aging can sometimes feel like a series of betrayals, joints that ache, energy that fades, balance that wavers. Short, thoughtful movement reframes this experience. The body is no longer an obstacle to manage, but a partner to understand. Each movement becomes a form of dialogue, a way of asking what the body needs today and responding with care. This emotional reconnection is not dramatic or immediate. It unfolds quietly, through repetition and patience. But its effects are profound. When movement is no longer associated with struggle, it becomes sustainable. When effort is met with reward rather than exhaustion, motivation returns. And when the mind begins to trust the body again, the body responds with greater ease, stability, and willingness to move through the world with confidence. There is a tendency in modern health advice to equate progress with more effort, more time, more discipline. Yet the human body, especially in later life, does not always respond best to excess. It responds to clarity. Aging is not a process of shutting systems down, it is a process of prioritization. The body becomes selective, conserving energy for what it perceives as essential. When movement aligns with this intelligence, improvement feels natural rather than forced. Long walks often carry the weight of expectation. They are prescribed as maintenance, as something to preserve what remains. This framing subtly implies limitation. A brief, targeted routine reframes movement as participation in ongoing adaptation. 5 minutes becomes an invitation rather than an obligation. It acknowledges that health is not about resisting age, but about working with biology as it is now, responsive and capable when given the right signal. Functional movement lies at the heart of this approach. The ability to rise from a chair, maintain balance, turn smoothly, or reach without hesitation defines independence more than endurance ever will. Short routines designed around these actions respect the realities of daily life. They strengthen the muscles and neural pathways most often used, reducing strain on joints and connective tissue. When the body is trained for function, it moves more efficiently, conserving energy and reducing fatigue throughout the day. Medical research increasingly supports this perspective. Doctors observe that patients who focus on brief, consistent strength and balance work experience fewer injuries and greater confidence. The body adapts quickly to clear, repeated signals. Even small amounts of resistance and coordination stimulate meaningful biological responses. Hormones involved in tissue repair, metabolism, and bone maintenance respond to quality of movement rather than quantity. This is why short routines, when done regularly, can produce changes that feel disproportionate to their duration. There is also a subtle shift in how time is perceived. 5 minutes feels available. It fits between moments. It does not compete with responsibilities or require recovery. This accessibility removes one of the greatest barriers to long-term health behaviors. When movement is easy to begin, it is more likely to become a habit. And habits, not intensity, shape the trajectory of health over years. This approach honors the body's capacity for resilience. Even later in life, muscles respond to challenge, bones respond to stress, and the nervous system responds to engagement. These systems are not fragile, they are adaptive. What they require is not constant pressure, but meaningful input. Short workouts provide this input without overwhelming the system. They respect recovery while still encouraging growth. Philosophically, this way of moving reflects a deeper understanding of aging. It suggests that wisdom in health lies not in doing more, but in doing what matters. Precision replaces persistence. Awareness replaces endurance. The body becomes a system to listen to rather than dominate. This mindset reduces conflict and increases cooperation between intention and physiology. Over time, the effects of this cooperation become visible in subtle ways. Movements feel smoother. Daily tasks require less effort. Confidence returns quietly, without fanfare. The body no longer feels like something to manage, but something that supports engagement with life. 5 minutes a day becomes less about exercise and more about maintaining a relationship with one's own physical presence. Ultimately, this approach shifts the narrative of aging from preservation to participation. Health is no longer measured by how much one can endure, but by how well one can respond. Short, doctor-recommended routines remind the body of its ongoing role in adaptation. They create space for strength, balance, and clarity to coexist without strain. And in that space, aging becomes not a narrowing of possibility, but a refinement of what truly sustains well-being.